World Wide Web, people hadn't imagined it yet, and I was with a group of people who did imagine the World Wide Web. We said, something like the web is coming, and other people said, nah. And then when the web finally came up, people kept saying, nobody could have predicted that. That's an example of something nobody could have predicted. We said, we were predicting it. But all these people who predicted the web coming, they didn't get much for it. Which is one of the places I learned, it's actually not so hard to predict the future because you don't actually get much for predicting the future if you do broad outlines. What you get money from is predicting very specific things, like Netscape will go big in the next 3 years or something. You can make a lot of money from that, but you can't make a lot of money for just knowing the overall trajectory of the future, not knowing very specific places and dates. So I was part of the group predicting the World Wide Web, and this was called Xanadu in California, and I started to have doubts about the vision of the World Wide Web that they had. They had this idea of backlinks, and how backlinks would improve conversation. And they were kind of radical libertarians. I hadn't been, but I sort of was absorbing that. And so the idea of betting markets was just accessible as an alternative for the World Wide Web. I thought, okay, what won't solve all our problems? What could solve our problems? What if we had betting markets? That's just the whole logic of it. I thought, basically, so what they thought, which was true, is that a lot of our shared conversations in the world just go badly. We form bad judgments together about things in the news and policy, etc. How could we make that go better? They wanted backlinks to help because they thought if you were reading something and somebody had a good critique of it, you could just find it from there and then ta-da, critique could squash the bad things. Right? You see how that works now, right? On the web, like all bad stuff is squashed because there's always a good rebuttal of it, you can find easy. See, that was the vision. But I thought, well, if we just had betting markets on these things, instead, then they would have a good consensus and that could cut through a lot of the bullshit. So that was my initial concept in roughly 88, 89. And then for the next years, I was focused on elaborating this vision, describing it, and then in 93 I decided to go back to school because I didn't think I had enough credentials and contacts. I was kind of nobody, so I did. I went back to Caltech to get a PhD in quantum theory. And during that time, the web actually showed up. And then some people who had been reading my writing about betting markets actually made a betting market on the web. It was one of the first things that happened on the web in '94. And then I won an electronics art prize in Linz, Austria on the basis of that a year later in '95. But anyway, there was this period of betting markets, but the first vision you see was just of, if only we would just allow betting markets, then that would solve the problem. And I wasn't really thinking very deeply and realized, no, just allowing betting on things is not actually going to solve the problem. The next thought was, well, okay, what if we convince the funders of research to subsidize these markets? And then I worked on how to subsidize markets with automated market makers. And that doesn't actually work because the funders of all these topics don't actually care anymore about the topics than anybody else. They're just playing the same game, they're part of the same game, and so they're not actually going to. So part of my research as a PhD student, I looked at the history of prizes in science versus grants and so on. That had gone actually badly, the wrong direction. It used to be dominated, and then it used to be prize dominated, then it became grants dominated. Anyway, so it wasn't until 10 years after I first started thinking about it that I came on to I can't talk louder. The following very simple insight that's been what other people don't get to when they first get into this topic, which is standard decision theory says the point of information is to inform decisions. If a piece of information won't actually change any of your decisions, it's actually worthless, unless it can get you some other piece of information. So what we want is to make these markets useful, we want them to be right next to decisions. Because then the people making the decision will be willing to pay for the information to subsidize the market and pay for the cost in order to get the information. That's the big win. And our world is full of people making decisions who could get more value from more accurate decisions and who should be willing to pay for better decisions. And then how can you put a market right next to a decision? Well, standard decision theory says you should look among your options and pick the highest expected value option in terms of your utility, conditional on your actions. So you should just look at decision conditional estimates and pick the one that has the best, highest set of decision conditional estimates. That's what you should do. That's what decision theory says. So to make a market right next to a decision, you just have the market giving decision conditional estimates. And that's what I call the decision market. And that's the key for making these markets be valuable. You have a person making a decision and you put a market right next to their decision, which just directly says, if you do this, this is what will happen. If you do this, this is what will happen. Didn't you want to know that? Shouldn't you be willing to pay for that? The bigger the decision, the more you should be willing to pay to find out the consequence of your action. That's the big win in my mind. And so ever since then, I've been preaching markets are cool, prediction markets are cool, forecasting is cool, but this is where the big value is. And this is hard because a lot of people first said, that's too complicated. Nobody can think about conditional predictions. That's just a concept that nobody can understand. It takes sophisticated decision theories to understand the concept of decision conditional predictions. It's not that hard, but okay. Or, our people aren't interested. So I think, a long time ago, I actually got this one guy, Peter McCluskey, to set up decision markets about the US election. I think I did this in the aughts. And he subsidized it, but then he committed to subsidizing afterward that he didn't need to. And so he spent more money than he didn't need to. Anyway, but the point is, it's not that useful to know who's likely to win the election. What's useful to know is what the consequence of who wins the election is. And so if you make markets on the consequence of the election, then that's actually a thing. And in the last presidential election cycle, Metaculus and Manifold actually did conditional markets on the consequences of who became president. So that was finally having reached this level. They had conditional markets, they had conditional estimates, and a bunch of them actually existed. Yay. Because that's where I think the big value is. But so now, to highlight the potential for this, I wrote a description of what if we used it for governance, the highest level governance, and I called that futurarchy. That's a form of government. Archy is a form of government. Futurarchy. There you go. Apparently there's some other use of the term that I wasn't aware of. That didn't even show up around here until after I introduced the term, but fine, I'm guilty for not having anticipated the future use of the term. But in any case, I wrote about this concept of futarchy for governance. I put it, again around 1999, 2000, worked on that, and then the idea was spread out. A lot of people heard about the idea, and actually the New York Times in 2008 called futarchy one of the words of the year because Hal Varian had written a column about it, and I guess he suggested it, but it didn't really take off on that basis. But the idea's been around, but now in the last few years, there's actually been some experiments. Real substantial experiments, a number of organizations trying it out. And I'll now tell you the history of the ones I know about. Now, first, before I even started this, a guy named Jeffrey Wernick in 1981 ran a finance company for 3 years in Chicago, where he ran the whole company on futarchy, deciding who to hire, what features to add to the financial simulation software system, and so on. He made a lot of money, and then stopped, and then apparently nobody else around the company decided to copy this thing. Because I only heard about it last year, and he told me, and nobody ever had told me about this. I've been writing about this for all these years. Okay, but Jeffrey Wernick deserves credit for that experiment. 81 to 84, running a company with these conditional markets successfully, but apparently not inspiring any confidence. Then, 3 years ago, a secretive India-based government agency has been using futarchy to make decisions about health policy with outcomes like infant mortality, decisions like, are we open on Saturdays? But there's a consultant for them who's in the United States who told me about it, but then he's gone silent because apparently they're so scared of publicity that they don't want anybody hearing about this. Even though what they did is they gave everybody in their district some crypto app on their phone that everybody could trade. So hundreds of thousands of people have traded on this thing. So as a reporter, you could easily go find about it if you want to look for it, but apparently they're scared to actually have any publicity. So I don't know what's been happening for the last year and a half, but the guy said he was going to market it to other countries. Maybe he has. Then 2 years ago, the MetaDAO, which was a crypto company set up to be governed by Futarchy. They make all their key decisions with Futarchy. That is, they have a coin, they estimate the value of the coin conditional on adopting a proposal or rejecting it, and they repeatedly have made 69 decisions so far. They have 13 client companies who they're helping to advise decisions on. They're worth, I don't know, 20 million compared to the 10,000 their initial coins was worth. And now they're doing some other spin-offs, and a number of other crypto companies are trying to copy this. So something called Butter has been doing estimates of, there's these coins who have ecosystems and they give grants to try to promote the ecosystem. So now they're giving grants based on a market estimate of the consequence of funding a grant. They're doing some experiments there, they're doing more. And there are a bunch of other companies I hear about that aren't, having maybe their advisor, who are also experimenting in this space. So, ta-da, a lot of experiments finally happening 25 years later in the space. What else do I want to tell you about? Academics have been jumping on this much more than practitioners, but only in the form of doing the sort of things academics do. So we've basically developed more algorithms and technology and experiments, and we've made a big pile of them, and the world has just mostly ignored that pile. But I can tell you what's in the pile. First of all, we did a bunch of lab experiments showing that manipulation just isn't a problem in these markets. Actually, the markets get more accurate when you manipulate them. I worked out how to subsidize markets and how to have subsidized market makers, and even the optimal time trajectory to do that for, say, these decision markets. We also worked out combinatorial markets. So you might know that there's usually a long shot bias in markets where if the odds are very lopsided, say it's 99 to 1, the people on the 99 side, they only get 1% if they win, and then there's transaction costs, and that doesn't sound very good, so then the odds move away from 1, even if rational hits 1. Combinatorial markets can overcome this problem. And I actually, did the math for combinatorial markets and showed a simple code that's you can find online implementing them. The simple implementation, just all possible combinations, but that actually works for up to, say, 30 binary variables. You can just implement all combinations and say, here's the magic trick. If you have, say, 30 binary markets, each of which has a subsidy, say a liquidity subsidy, and then you make a market that allows trading in all possible combinations of them, you can have all those combinations trading with exactly the same liquidity at no extra cost, 0 extra cost. So the liquidity for the base markets is enough liquidity to support all the combinatories. And for that can end the long shot bias, because what happens is the guy on the... Done? Are we done? Okay. The guy on the 99 side can make his bet and then use that same money to bet on several other topics. You see, in combinatorics, I bet A, somebody else bets not A. I bet 99%, they bet 1%. Now I take my A assets, $100 if A, and bet on B. If it's 99 to 1, then I'll get $101 if B, A and B. And you see, I can repeatedly bet on many topics using the same money in a combinatorial market. Whereas the guy on the other side, he bets on not A and not B. His risk tolerance is just running out really fast, whereas mine isn't, because I'm making a lot of sure bets. So this means you don't have the long shot bias, because people betting on the sure thing can use their money on many different topics at once. And so that's the simple all combinations thing. I wrote about that in 2003. But then we worked out how to do this for thousands of variables, and all combinations doesn't work for that. We had funding by ARPA to make a Bayesian network implementation that we implemented for 1,200 variables. A Bayesian network, 1,200 variables, and you can basically bet on any combination in this network, and it will exactly be updated according to Bayes' rule, but that's something we've had software for a long time. But we also have representations of your assets such that we can ensure that you can't make any bets that you can't pay off in a possible state. And we can exactly update those assets, and we did this. We implemented the system a decade ago with 1,200 variables. So now, a decade later, you can probably do lots more variables. So that's a technology that's out there that's not being used. And I'm trying to impress you with how much technology academics have developed that isn't being used. But I still think the huge value here is these conditional markets. Because again, every person or group making a decision could be helped by having a more informed decision. How can you do that? You can show them more informed estimates of the consequence of the decision. They should be willing to pay for that. Government should be, firms should be willing to pay for it. So for a long time, if I had $1 million, my simple guerrilla marketing approach is make two markets for each company in the Fortune 500 or the S&P 500. One is the trading the stock price for cash, conditional on the CEO staying in power until the end of the quarter, and the other is stock market for cash, conditional on the CEO leaving by the end of the quarter. These now give you two different prices: how much the company is worth if the CEO stays, how much the company is worth if the CEO leaves. That's advice to the board about whether to keep the CEO. If I did that for 500 companies, I think at least 20 of them would say to fire the CEO, 50, and that would be news, and reporters would report on it, and the CEOs themselves would not like to look at this. They'd try to manipulate these markets to make themselves look good, and that would add liquidity and add thickness to the markets and make it more interesting. And of course, as a revenue thing, you could offer to delist their company for a fee, right? But anyway, that's what I've always thought is a nice guerrilla marketing thing. See, the key thing is we're trying to make these markets prestigious. And remember the social network? Like, if you start with like a social network with a low prestige group and you try to expand it, people go, I don't know if I want to be associated with it. If you start at Harvard, see, your network is Harvard people, and then you say, hey, Yale people, do you want to join the Harvard thing? Oh, it's your. And eventually, you get everybody wanting to join because you start at the top, right? So the idea here is you can get the most prestigious corporate decision to be done through this mechanism. You can get other ones too. The most prestigious one is keeping the CEO. So that's why it's the guerrilla marketing strategy. You can just do it, and there you would have it. Legitimize this mechanism for the most prestigious corporate decisions. So I, of course, have many other things I can say, but now I'd rather respond to questions and comments, because by now you must have some.
Yeah, I've got a ton of questions, so come back to me around. But on that last one, why, is there any reason that we couldn't do that today?
You have $1 million?
Well,
that's all I asked.
Specifically, could we, and maybe the question is more around limitations of Manifold, for example. Because you could create all these markets on Manifold today. Does the play money aspect really limit the legitimacy and the prestige of such?
So the play is you make the markets and then you go to reporters and say, look at this market, it says this guy should be fired. What do you think? Now the reporter has to say, will my readers take it seriously, right? So anticipating that you need to have a market thick enough and serious enough that the reporter would take it seriously. And I'm afraid the Manifold play money markets won't do it. Okay, there is a question of how much it would take. Is it 10,000, 100,000, $1 million? How much money at stake would it take for them to take the story seriously? But unfortunately, I just don't think that.
So let's say you implement that market and you get a lot of volume. But let's say you're second in line and you're going to become CEO if the person loses their position. That might be worth to you millions of dollars. But it doesn't cost millions of dollars to manipulate a market from like 52.48 to the other way around.
You're wrong.
And why?
It does. I told you we've done lab experiments, field experiments, mathematical modeling of this issue of market manipulation. And the answer is that when people expect manipulators in the market, like they would in this case, the market becomes more accurate as a result. Markets are more accurate when manipulators are expected.
There's a paper from 2 months ago that calls that into question as a preprint currently. But they did manipulations on Manifold, both real money and fake money markets, Manifold doing sweepstakes.
Right.
And they found that these manipulations are pretty robust. That they manipulated a set of markets, they didn't know another set of markets, and they saw how long it took, for those to be corrected and whether there was a measurable difference.
But they did not measure accuracy of the markets in the two sets. So the claim I made was the market's more accurate. That's not the same as the claim as you couldn't move the price. The point is, yes, you can move the price, but other people will be moving the price. In contrary, you might not see that as directly, but the counter effect of other people's trading against your movement, on average, makes the markets more accurate. And again, we have lab experiments, field experiments, and mathematical models showing that. And of course, we'd be happy to see more tests. But that's a surprising fact about these markets, is they are especially robust and resistant to manipulation. That's why you want to use them in cases where you wouldn't trust other people who might
This is extremely hypothetical, but if I had $1 million, are there legal barriers to making this happen, or is it really just
Well, most of the cost is because you'd have to go offshore. So yeah, I mean, yes, there are legal barriers. So I don't know. Here's a story you guys might not know about. In the aughts, there was this thing called the Hollywood Stock Exchange, where they were betting on movies and actors and stuff like that. And this got actually popular within Hollywood and well respected, and a lot of people trading. And so they were good prices, good accurate prices on Hollywood. And then the owners of this market thought, let's go real money. They lobbied the CFTC. They went through all the regulatory process to get approval. They spent probably $5 million to get the regulatory approval of the CFTC, but they got it. And then a few months before they were about to go live, Hollywood executives heard about this. They lobbied Congress to pass a new law to make that illegal, which they did. So now there are only two kinds of futures markets that are illegal in the US. Onion futures, made illegal for some reason in the 50s, and movie futures, which were made illegal in the aughts because Hollywood didn't want this to happen. Of course, they didn't give them their $5 million back, right? They had spent $5 million, and it's wasted because they followed the rules, they got legally approved, and then the law was changed.
Who lobbied against the Hollywood exchange?
Which particular Hollywood executives you're asking?
It was executives?
It was firms, Hollywood firms. I don't know which particular ones. The industry, basically. I mean, obviously it would have to be a coordination of the industry. No one person would want to do all the lobbying, and then, like everybody's free ride, presumably they coordinated together. But I don't know the names. But I know the law was passed.
I haven't heard you talk much about the ethical issues of markets on choices that people do have like direct control over. And you said manipulation won't affect the accuracy of the predictions that much, but is it possible that the second order effects of having these things is that it incentivizes
So
people to make
sabotage is different than manipulation.
different
Those are
kinds
two
of
different kinds of
decisions?
problems. So you're asking, could sabotage be prevented, right? Now, first notice, this is a potential problem with any mechanism of a listening forecast. Any mechanism of a listening forecast whatsoever would induce people to have incentives to change the world in order to be more forecast. So this is just a generic problem with all forecasting, not particular to this mechanism of forecasting.
Or trading like the stock market,
For example, yes. So, but we know a fair bit about sabotage in the stock market. There's actually surprisingly little sabotage in corporate markets. That is, like in the 80s, there was somebody who went out and poisoned some Tylenol capsules. And eventually they found them. But in the meantime, they thought, could this be somebody selling the company stock short and poisoning the capitalists to make money? It turned out not to be true. 9/11, people often thought, did somebody do this in order to make money selling, options short on the airline stocks, which all did fall dramatically at 9/11, but no, nobody actually did that. The closest thing I've ever found was Paine Webber, some computer programmer at Paine Webber put a logic bomb in that supposedly erased all their data, and it sold some options on it falling, but they had backups and they caught it and that didn't work. So apparently the stock market is remarkably robust to sabotage. Plausibly, that's just because you have to have a big effect to affect the stock price of the firm. You can't just do a little thing. And the people who have money just actually aren't able to find a partner with people able to do the bad stuff. Now, if you look at life insurance market, we do have regulations on life insurance exactly because people are wary of who they sell life insurance to, because apparently in the past people have been willing to kill an individual person to get the life insurance payments. And we do that, regulate that. Or just make sure we track who trades on the side. If you had to say you had a project with a deadline, this is a popular market concept, you might think if we make a market on a deadline, somebody related to the project could sabotage the project, not make the deadline, and then get paid off on their bets and not make the deadline. So a simple solution there is to take everybody who could sabotage the project, make sure they all have a positive stake in it, and they can't bet that stake below zero. They can bet it up and down above zero to express their information, but just make sure nobody ever gets a negative stake and nobody ever benefits by sabotaging the project. So, but look, I'm not saying this should never be regulated in any possible way. I might quibble with any particular proposal for regulation, but this is just another area of human behavior where if you expect bad things to happen, you might have laws or regulations
think if your goal is to actually make these systems be implemented in the real world, one of the most important things is that you want to assuage people's
But does anybody,
concerns about
does anybody
like,
do that for
ethical-
stocks? Has anybody assuaged anybody's concerns about sabotaging stocks? Ever in the last century of stocks?
There's
they've
a
never
lot
done
of
it.
there are people who don't want the stock market to exist, but they're not.
But
like
it
ours.
does.
They're
And
not.
these concerns just don't stop the stock market from existing, even though the stock market has done nothing to assuage those concerns.
There's a lot of in politics about the politicians insider trading or whatever.
And you know what? We haven't stopped that either. Congress people can just do insider trading, and that's apparently okay.
Yeah.
And that's how it's been going for a long time. And nobody seems interested in stopping that either, so right?
How do you resolve the incentive problem of half the bets just not going anywhere?
You mean in terms of the conditional ones?
Yeah.
Um,
If the condition isn't happening, your buddy was just like, was sitting doing nothing for however many years
So
that
the
was.
point is, say there's 5 options of the decision you make. You don't know which option. Say you've got $100. If I bet the $100 here, you might think, and this option never happens, that $100 is just wasted and lost. But in fact, you can bet the same $100 on each of them. That's the nice thing about conditional market. Now you have to go to the trouble of betting them. But again, literally, you take the same amount of money, you can bet it on all of it on all of the options. Because they're mutually exclusive, only one will happen, and now your full bet will go through or to that one. But you don't have a limitation on your capital for betting on all the options.
Are there any prediction markets that do that today, like that aspect of it? Because
I believe they, manifold markets do.
where
The manifold markets have these conditional markets, and I believe they do that. Yes.
my question was going to be, you mentioned prestige and starting with the CEOs. What about the White House? Like, to what extent have you been able to have conversations or ideas with top tier government about using
So
it?
roughly 20 years ago, a lot of firms experimented with these markets, and then pretty much all of them went away, even though they typically had good accuracy and user satisfaction. They usually just pissed off somebody in many. Now, an interesting exception for how long it lasted is there were markets at the CIA in forecasting key events of the sort you think the CIA might be wanting to forecast. And it lasted for a long time. It still hasn't gone away now, but here was the thing that allowed it to last. They had this one rule. So the point of the ramification of the point of the realm of the CIA is white papers. White papers are written on a country or an issue, and then authors are on that white paper, and then they cite other white papers, and it goes up the chain, and the president might read it. You know, career top event is your white paper is looked at by the president, he thinks it's good, and now everybody who was on that white paper gets celebrated, and everything they cited, etc. That's the point of the realm of the CIA. So the one rule for prediction market was it never gets cited. Ever. The white papers all pretend prediction markets don't exist, so they never lose any credit to the markets. So it's okay to have the markets as long as you know the markets will never get credit, and you will never get credit for your trading in the markets. You can trade there, but that won't promote you. You will be promoted on your white papers, not on what you do in the markets. And that's what allowed the markets to exist for as long as they did. But unfortunately, you can see if people at the top start to hear these markets exist, now we're going, okay, I see your white paper. What do the markets say? People are going to be pissed off. They don't want you to ask about markets. They don't exist anymore. Sorry. Just look at my white paper. Please look at my white paper. That's how the game goes. So I might give you an idea into prediction markets of government and their obstacles and issues, right? The president never was allowed to see prediction markets. He gets to see the white papers. And if he says that's a good white paper, now credit goes down to the authors of the white papers, not to the markets.
So we just need a president from this room who really appreciates
That's
markets.
one way to do it, but even then it might be hard to actually make them change. Presidents come and go, you know. These career diplomats, you know, they get to analysis the way
One issue is in the real world, we're making real decisions. We're really interested in events that are longer than a time horizon of, say, like 6 months or a year. But in real markets, it's almost impossible to do discount rate phenomena to like make that work in practice, which is why like 95% of Polymarket markets are like, you know, a few days to a few months. There's nothing longer than that. How do you address this with a Futarchy system? How do you overcome that obstacle?
So, as you may know, stock prices are a weighted average into the indefinite future of the company's prospects. how far into the future it counts depends on the market discount rate. So the generic answer to the question is how do you get the market to care more about the future is you lower the market interest rate. Lower market interest rates means longer time horizons. That's literally how you get markets to pay more attention to the future is you lower the interest rate. But given a certain interest rate, then they will have a certain weight of the future. And then these Futarchy markets, which are based on basically a coin value or a stock value, are markets about the overall impact into the future. That's literally what they are. I don't know if you know, there are actually long-term, say, bond markets, that 30-year bond markets is the longest time they have. So there are some actually longer term. So the main thing is, if you want people to bet on a longer term thing, they're just going to have to lock their money down for longer, and that's a larger opportunity cost. You'll just have to pay more. The answer is, it just costs more to get longer term forecasts. You can get them, but you'll pay more because they have a larger opportunity cost of their assets or resources in order to bet on a longer term thing. But if you're willing to pay enough, you can get answers.
Oh, sorry.
Go.
You described the difficulties getting an organization like the CIA to allow markets to be taken seriously.
Right.
Are you like more or less hopeful about, say, scientific prediction markets on replicating discoveries, or do you think like that? Do you think the politics is actually worse than actually?
So my first application I had in mind, because look, I was studying philosophy of science at the University of Chicago as a grad student, so I was thinking about science as the first application of these areas. And so I realized that over time that academia is really a tough nut to crack. I do think I have a solution, but it's a subtler and harder solution than you might have thought. It doesn't work to just make markets legal. Academics just ignore them. It doesn't work to offer the opportunity to the funders to fund markets because they're going to go, no. But here's what I think does work. The one thing academics won't give up on is the claim that the people they are now celebrating through jobs or publications or grants are the people that in the future, when we look back a century or two, will be said to have been the important people. They won't let go of that claim. Everything else they might let go of. So like if you say, hey, prove yourself, you're not actually being useful to industry, let's say, we're not useful to industry, we're in a higher cloud than that, go away, right? So the threat of showing that they're not useful at the moment to the larger economy is not really a threat to them at all. But the claim that nobody will care about your guys in a few centuries, that would be devastating to them. They will not allow that, okay? And that's my lever. So what do? I first show that we can take the past, assign historians to rank people in a field in the past who should have been listened to more. And then once we've shown that that's possible, we just create futures markets in that ratings actually in a century or two from now. We highlight those rankings in the markets. And when Harvard hires a sociologist, we say, yeah, but that was number 78, the list of options you had. Why did you go that far down the list? You're going to embarrass them into picking somebody higher on the list or trading in the market to move their guy out. Either way, it works to create pressure to have their actions reflect market judgments of the long-term potential of people's work. That's my solution to fixing academia. The first project is to fund these historical studies. Again, if you got some money there, let me know, but that's the limitation on that. That, I think, could reform academia by connecting it to the thing they won't let go of.
I have two questions, and both of these questions are going to sound sarcastic, but they're actually not. My first question is, you personally have really been at this, and you've made a lot of predictions and forecasts that I think have come to the fore. Have you found, or to what extent have you been able to turn this expertise into things that can personally make you rich, or how much of a delta is there between applying this at a theoretical level to personal finance? And then my second question is, I totally agree that applying prediction markets and Futarchy to academia can be very interesting. I would think if there's a place that this could be done, it would be the George Mason Econ faculty. To what degree has it been done, and why isn't the Mason Econ department at the cutting edge of applying Futarchy?
So, okay. The world has a key problem in promoting innovation. Part of the point of these new mechanisms is to get the world to be better at promoting innovation. But in the world we're in now, the world doesn't actually promote innovation. I told you the story about the World Wide Web, and the people who foresaw it didn't actually get much payoff for that. That's actually a relatively consistent thing in lots of areas, including in prediction markets. So my ability to forecast the long term doesn't get paid that much. That's why it's possible for me to do it. If there were lots of other competing for this because there was a huge reward, well then I wouldn't be the one who got the reward. I get the reward such as it is because nobody else is willing to do it because there's hardly any payoff. That's how these things go. So now, when you predict something and then there's a bunch of business activity that shows up related to the thing you predict, do they want you? So you know, like companies have boards of advisors. They don't want any advice from the advisors. They never do. What they want is the prestige of the people who are on the board of advisors to shine onto their project. So they want prestigious people. So they pick people from the most prestigious institutions in order to be on the board of advisors. They don't actually have to need to know much about the project. They just need to be prestigious to be on the board of advisors. And they don't want any advice at all. Businesses almost never want advice about their products or their technology or their business plan or anything from academics certainly. They just want your prestigious shine to glow onto their projects so they can get funding and attention. So I'm unfortunately just not prestigious enough. Like when almost nobody else was in prediction markets, people would come to me as reporters or whatever because they didn't have many other options. But as soon as it got to be a bigger deal, a bunch of much more prestigious academics jumped on it, said, hey, we're over here, and they went, okay, you. And they went to interview them and have them as advisors, et cetera, because that's what they're looking for. They're buying prestige. So forecasting the future doesn't directly give you prestige. That's just a fact about our prestige world. And so you don't get, how do you get rich? Well, you get rich by having allies who have money, able to invest in a project where you also have allies helping you to develop it, helping you to market it, et cetera. You have to be well connected in a network of elites, basically, to make money by
for life.
Funding a business venture and making it work. And part of that is to collect prestigious academics to associate with your thing, and then you should be very vicious about getting the most prestige for the cheapest price you can, because you're trying to make a business venture work. That means you don't need me. Unless I'm the one who understands the thing and you don't understand it, then you might want to talk to me. So that's what's happening at the moment with Futarchy, but I think in a couple of years Futarchy gets bigger and they won't need me. Because they can get people from Harvard and other big shot places, and they'll just be more prestigious than me. That's just how the game works.
And Futarchy at George Mason, the George Mason econ.
Academics like to claim that they're the fountain of innovation in the world, but they don't want to innovate in their own world. Nobody wants to innovate in their own world. They want to innovate in somebody else's world. The people who get innovation thrust upon them are not really happy with it and not eager for it. Other people thrust innovation upon them. They are not seeking to change things.
On the topic of prestige, is there anything we can do as people who do forecasting type stuff and sometimes talk to the media in terms of the reputation of forecasting is kind of part prestigious Ivy League smart person thing and part gambling addiction and low class stuff like that?
Right now, so for example, long ago there was this policy analysis market thing that happened in 2003 where there were these markets that I was part of setting up markets in the Middle East, but they were accused of planning terrorist attacks. And part of the criticism there is people said, look, we've got a lot of prestigious people at our intelligence agencies. Why would we let ordinary people trade in the market to tell us anything? Who would want to listen to ordinary people trading in the market compared to the prestigious people we have? But actually, in the business press, prices of stocks are taken seriously. Even though anybody could trade in them, what we know is those prices are being set by elites. The people who are setting the prices in financial markets for stocks and other things are the richest, well-connected hedge funds who actually have more information and actually are able to be the ones making money setting the prices. So actual markets are not equal democracies. Actual markets are really quite unequal. And the people who are winning in them are people who are actually more valuable than others. They're better. Now, so here's a different problem. There was I'm trying to remember the name, a New York-based company that did business software. They set up some prediction markets, and they had two reasons for doing that. They said, well, we'd like to get these estimates of when we'll finish these projects and stuff, and we want to find the people we haven't noticed who are in our company who are unusually insightful. We will look at who are winning in these markets and then maybe promote those people and rely on those people more because the markets will help us find hidden talent. And so the markets did find hidden talent. And then they looked at those people and they said, oh, no. Because they didn't have the look of talent, you see. They were talented, but as you know, in most corporate organizations, you need the look of talent. You have the right cadence and style of talking, style of dressing, the place you came from. There's just a style of sort of people they want to promote, and these people just didn't have that style. And yes, they are smart and they're informed, but who the hell cares? What you're trying to do is make a company that has good, impressive looking people when you meet with clients and meet each other. They didn't want these people. So then the question is, prestige for what? Right? Is there an environment where actually being good at forecasting is in fact prestigious? Now, in some of these hedge companies, they do have some people in there who are good at predicting, even if they aren't good at presenting to outsiders. And a lot of organizations have that. But the people who are valued are kind of kept behind the scenes and not shown to clients because they don't present well, right? A lot of companies have those, but then it's hard for you as one of those people to advertise this fact because people around you don't want to tell anybody about this fact. And nobody ever gets to meet you in your professional role, so it's hard to actually leverage your unusual ability to be a backroom person that's really needed to get other people to bid for you because nobody else knows. That's just a fact about our business world.
Twitter as a company has taken an interest in prediction markets with a partnership with Polymarket and XAI too, probably. I'm curious if you have a sense of like what would be the most ambitious version of how they should integrate prediction markets.
Again, I see the big value in making decisions. So I might say, what big decisions are near tweets? And I'm going to look at that and think, no, I'm not thinking of any.
Okay.
And you can think of one good and suggest it to them. But no, I think about what big decisions are right next to a tweet so that on a tweet we can put a market on that decision. And I'm just not thinking of the decision.
What about like for XAI or Grok?
Again, you need to, the decisions that are important need to be highlighted and visible. So a key thing about the world is most managers do not want advice on their decisions. Why? Because anybody who seems to visibly be giving them advice seems to rise in status and they are falling by the fact that they are taking somebody else's advice. So people do not want to visibly seem to take other people's advice. And they don't even want people to be open to criticism on their decisions. So in fact, they don't even want to reveal that they're considering something until they're finally decided that they want to do it. They present their decision as a completion and say, we've decided this, all these people are behind it, of course you're going to support it. They don't even want to open up the situation where they're uncertain about what to do because they could be criticized at that point for making the wrong choice. So the hard part is to get visible the key choices. So at XAI, I don't know what the key choices they're making are. You don't until somebody does. We can't make a market on those things. The challenge is to find and make visible the key choices.
What are decisions in your life that you wish there were markets about?
I mean, again, the key heuristic here is there's a certain cost of setting up these markets and getting people to trade, and that needs to be weighed against the value of the decision, right? So that's why I look for the big organizational decisions as the key obvious things. Going to advise individuals means you have to go way down the scale of the size of the decision, but people have individual decisions. I just think in general about people like me as opposed to me in particular, I could just say, I think it would be interesting every time somebody gets engaged to have a market on, if they get married, how long will it last? At a point where they might be able to back out. Like, once they're committed, it's too late to give advice, right? So you need to find out that they are considering getting engaged or getting engaged long enough before the decision so that the cases where the odds are low, they can back out, right? That's what you want. But you can see how this is an awkward thing to create. They can't ask for it, obviously. You'd have to do it against their wishes. But still, you'd be giving them value by showing a percentage of them that, hey, this isn't going to work, you should bail. That's an example. The same thing for changing careers. I changed career at one point in my life, and the question was that a good job? I still don't know if that was a good choice. If I had a market on, will this work out? I might have bailed on the career change strategy because I would have thought that's kind of risky, let's not do it.
Setting up these markets and making sure that they are manipulated and are robust costs a lot of money. What do you think about proposals to use that money and instead set up, say, a play money market and just pay people to do it, or set up a reputational market, or I mean, like, let's say you're Apple, you can just say, I'm running the contest and the winner gets to be the Apple forecaster of the year. People would be really interested in that, and it would cost much less than setting up these robust markets.
I don't see that most of the costs are different. So a real money market and a play money market share a lot of the same costs. You still have to design the question. You still have to decide who you're going to entice to participate. You still have to ask about whether it's manipulated. You still have to wonder how you're going to use the information. A lot of the costs remain the same. The only costs that are different are the costs related to the actual, having it be actual money. But most of those costs can go away if you just have a repeated set of the same decisions. So like, I think the first markets to explore here are not the artisanal for each client, I'm going to invent something special for them. You want to have just a standard set of choices that a lot of companies have and just go to each one and do it again and again. Like for example, new hires or project deadlines or something like that. So once you've worked out the bugs of new hires or project deadlines, the cost of setting up one more is actually really quite low because you've already worked out the bugs of that general kind of thing and you're just doing one more instance. Or even the marriage thing, right? Once you've done 10 of these marriage things, I think the 11th would be pretty easy to set up. You'd have worked out most of the bugs there. So, and I actually think, the money, the gain is that you actually get stronger incentives and you're actually willing to pay more. And I think when it's important, you should pay more. Like, you're married, yeah, you should pay to find out whether that's going to work.
So I just quickly saw that you started to create the intellectual framework for these prediction markets back in 1988.
Yes.
The same year as the Iowa electronic markets. Can you talk about the emergence of the idea and how these concepts came about and how you sort of created this idea?
So betting markets go back a long way. And in that first 10 years, I spent a lot of effort looking in literatures to find people who had some similar things. You could find various people who said, hey, why don't we do bets on this? So there was a spattering of people who had the idea, let's do bets on more things than we had done before, but they were like one-off suggestions of particular things you could do more bets on. So the thing that distinguished me was I was just saying, we could do lots more things using bets. And that was really my distinctive initial brand. It's not that other people didn't think that bets were a thing. Bets had been a thing for a long time. I know that we couldn't do more, but I was saying more explicitly we could just do a lot more. And that's sort of outside the usual academic voice because the usual academic voice is really restrained. Well, they don't want to say something big like that. And I was just like, nope, big, we could do a lot more. But then that wasn't the only thing I did. Then again, I went into the details and I made contributions to many of the detailed issues with respect to the markets. But that was my initial new thing in the brain, was to say, we could do a lot more with these markets than we are, and that just has huge potential.
And what institution were you working with at the time that you came up with that?
I was a research software engineer in the AI group at NASA.
AI group?
Yes.
What kind of AI was it back then?
It was really Bayesian statistics at that time.
Well, your machine's like 8 minutes away from you. You need some AI.
Right.
You can't just tell them.
But basically, one of the things we did, Bayesian classification of stars, for example. That was one of the things we did at our AI group at NASA at the time.
Thank you.
And those are now widely used technologies. So you should be in charge of the timing of all this.
No. Look, we can just keep going here. Though I'll also give you a break too. I'm standing here below the fan, so it's a little bit.
There we go. There's the
Sorry.
Old gangster.
Question for
Original
you.
gangster.
You mentioned that combinatorial markets have not been implemented, if I'm not mistaken.
Not commercially. Right?
Commercially.
Bunch of research. Bunch of research projects doing it.
Do you think there's a reason why? Like, does it does that have to do with behavioral, behavior change for users and traders, or?
So the main reason often given is that the more advanced techniques look more complicated. And then people say, that would be more software to implement or harder on the users.